A grand jury in New Mexico has indicted actor Alec Baldwin with 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter. The charge stems from the fatal shooting of cinematographer Helena Hutchins on the set of the movie Rust back in 2021. Baldwin was the lead actor on the film as well as a co-producer. While rehearsing a scene, he pointed a gun at Hutchins, which then went off. She was killed, and the movie's director was wounded. Baldwin insists he pulled back the hammer on the pistol but did not pull the trigger. A similar charge against Baldwin was dismissed in April, but prosecutors revisited the case after new analysis of the firearm involved. Baldwin also faces lawsuits from members of the crew, but those have been put on hold until any criminal case is decided. For more on this, I want to bring in Matt Long. He's a former prosecutor who specialized in gun crimes, and he's joining us from Phoenix, Arizona. And Scott, I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
You're welcome. Hi, Andrew.
So what do you make of these latest charges against Alec Baldwin?
Well, what I make is the discretion of prosecutors ought to be questioned, ought to be looked at. This is interesting. It's kind of fascinating, and I am struck by the Alec Baldwin's defense attorney's statement as they look forward to their day in court as a current criminal defense attorney and somebody who considers the work of prosecutors once noble. I would tend to agree with them.
Tell me why that is.
Well, there's the specific things here. The theory that they have is involuntary manslaughter with 2 theories: either the negligent use of a firearm, or I think what it is without due caution or circumspection. And that has to do with what is the caution due in this context. That is the context of a movie set where you have an actor relying on an armorer, who, by the way, is also facing trial and was previously found to have some issues of their own with dealing with a firearm, relying on that, and then being handed a prop. And in that context, what is the caution due in those circumstances? Apparently, New Mexico has no other street crimes with which to expend resources, given the number of resources that is put here in this context. The other thing that stood out, and I'm relying on news reports at this point. I haven't reviewed the report, but they're relying apparently on a report, a firearms expert who did an analysis of this gun. And at least there was a report that says that parts of that gun were replaced to make it functional for his testing. And based on that testing, they found it was functional. So in addition to the context, I'm interested in what parts were replaced and why was it necessary to replace the parts for his testing to make it functional? Is that accurate? And so it just raises question once again about prosecutorial discretion and the manner in which gun crimes are disparately handled by prosecutors across this country and in counties across the country, including in New Mexico and Arizona, where I practice. This seems to highlight once again whether or not prosecutors' judgment can be relied on, given some of the information here. It's clear they're relying on his statement where he said, I didn't pull the trigger, and there's evidence apparently that now he did pull the trigger. But my question again becomes the context of this, the environment of this, which is a movie set and an actor utilizing effectively a prop and relying on the work of an armorer. What in fact is this actor's caution due in that circumstance?
And how common is it to see charges like this after having previous charges dismissed?
Well, it does happen. There are, cases are often dismissed, and you like to see that if they do a further investigation, an additional investigation. And clearly, this becomes a very, very narrow question of whether or not he pulled the trigger, given his statements that he did not. And they determined, yes, he pulled the trigger. So it seems to be a very narrow question by this prosecutor, the special prosecutor, which again raises interesting questions about accountability, and because it is a special prosecutor, of whether or not the trigger was actually pulled. And it seems very clear that they are operating on a fairly narrow theory of gun safety requirements. But here again, I think the context matters. The other individuals that are involved matters. You do have the assistant director who apparently previously pled guilty. The person that handed Mr. Baldwin the firearm pled guilty previously, and you have the armorer who is facing trial, as I understand, in next month for their role in their culpability, their liability, their criminal liability here. But it also becomes a question of civil liability versus criminal liability. And it just seems troubling when we have prosecutors that look for very narrow theories in order to get criminal punishment when there might be other alternate options available, either under the law or in other circumstances. So I primarily have questions and concerns in this case regarding the discretion of the prosecutor and their narrow question and the amount of resources that are used. Again, when I'm certainly, as a once resident of New Mexico, knowing the street crimes that go on there, I'm always interested in where governments choose to put their criminal justice resources and where those resources are not going.
Matt, it was interesting talking to you. Thank you. Matt Long is a former prosecutor, and he joined us from Phoenix, Arizona.